I'm James Sherry, and this is the 41st continuous year of the series that Ted and Charles started at the Ear Inn in 1979. I decided to curate this series myself because I wanted to hear some of my favorite writers who haven't read at Segue recently. I first heard Saretta read a few years ago, so when I decided to curate, I thought of her among the first, or as she says, quote, "We thought our strength was in numbers as opposed to geography, distribution of feeling." And of course, this was played out in the recent election. I'm always excited to notice the multiple paths that people take to arrive at environmental perspectives. Saretta's poetry links person and surroundings in a way that propels her from identity formation through lyric toward environmental writing. As she says, "Tell me again, your names for what we become." Lyric becomes landscape. Quote, "Our landscapes were emotional, our hesitations volumetric." Saretta's language, the instruments were interrogative. Even in this public space, this earthly space, quote, "Were there private failures?" Apparently. Lyric and landscape are not separable, even in passion, as she says, quote, "Desire is the product of liminal space." Her presentation of desire extends beyond the human in a way that doesn't separate us from them. So in her poem dedicated to Natalie Diaz, she points out, quote, "Coyotes in their lone nocturnes, mourning from every hole." Who dare say that? I'm not known for my ready acceptance of such formulations, but her syntax is irresistible. Quote, "Your mouth open for my light-filtered hand, the shapes we make as we undo. Some questions emergent are best handled as expressions of time." And then she moves on to politics. Subjection rests on fleshing, legal designations and grammars of threat, to be threatened, endangered, endangered by, to be in danger of, extinct. Who else has traveled so far so quickly from lyric to politics to climate change? Saretta's work shows the breadth of poetry, how it filters into all human interaction. Almost without noticing, the reader finds themselves elsewhere, in another time, with another person, yet still in poetry. And then we have her work on alt nature, recapturing alternatives from Steve Bannon. Saretta's time and place breathe like an accordion to play her music. Quote, "Relocation arrives through many terms, sentence, reservation, subject, dam." Each category of the taxonomy of relocation links to the next, making these connections through passion, politics, poetry, and ecology takes us beyond the pastoral description. Alt nature really is another place, really another time. It's also right now. So please join me in welcoming Saretta Morgan.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad that you're here. I'm really glad that I'm here. This is my third time as a guest of Segue. And actually, I recognize, I think Michael Gottlieb was in the audience. I want to say that one time I was here, I read alongside Michael. And I also I'm really glad for Segue as a community of writers. My first kind of exciting literary event in New York was a Segue reading. And I'd gone to like the lesbian Her Story archives and then went from there to Segue, and Maria Damon, who is also here, was doing like needlepoint with rock music and video installation behind her. And I was kind of blown away. I was like, wow, this is poetry. This is amazing. Christopher Stackhouse was also doing a presentation on This Red Door, which is like a collaborative thing he was doing in Berlin. But anyway, it was really amazing. It wasn't what I thought poetry could be. And so yeah, I'm really excited to be back and to be sharing. I also want to say, James, in that amazing introduction, that kind of reminded me of a Mad Lib, but like with my work inserted into all the different places. He mentions like poetry that's concerned with the ecological, and I just wanted to give a shout out to Asia Wadid, who is here, as well as Brenda Ejima, and James as well, like people who I've really looked up to in that respect. And I'm going to be screen sharing. So I've been going with an artist, Nazafrain Lofty, who's based in Tucson, to a wildlife reserve in southern Arizona. And the southern border of the park is the US-Mexico border. And there's a lot of crossing that happens there. And myself and this artist have been going there once a month just to meet and talk about our relationships to land. And I kind of just do some kind of experiments or whatever, like when I go. And so I'm going to be sharing the most recent one of those. It's just in a PowerPoint format. It's nothing fancy. Crap. Okay, there we go. And I'll just advance the slides kind of at random as I'm reading. Okay, is that showing up correctly? Just the screen? Okay, cool. And I'm going to be reading from two long poems. The first is called Them We Did Not Die, and it's kind of a poem that I'm writing like alongside these trips to the wildlife refuge. And then the second one, James mentioned, it's a very long love poem to my wife, Natalie. And I'll read from that one second. Them We Did Not Die. Story is produced as form negotiates landscape. Mass and syntax, collectivity, autonomy, and origins. Language for radical shape comes only through accumulation. It's home. With regard to collectivity, within the point where one impression is restrained yet another continues, we find an impasse. This word I use to suggest active projection. Impasse, one origin for the terminal point of a specific collectivity, the hour at which relationship must shift. With regard to home, it is where language emerges. The mass, non-viable through speech, though fully conceded to image, axum, iris, and flora materially constituted, read figures through variation, the penetration, fell fields, and foundation, cause of rupture. Text, analog, observation versus narrating what is primarily geometric, not time, not question, except the wonder of its own temporality, the other text. This is form understanding, form through which understanding passes, proxy to the conditions from which they emerge, drawing intelligence. Being encounters itself and its other surfaces through vegetation, such a simple thing. All space holds a collective body, amorously or otherwise. What then comprises impasse? Assume narration as transitive in grammatical and logical sense. If a body passes always through a landscape and that landscape is not vacant, then the landscape at certain points impresses the body, physically, physiologically. Then those marks are indicative of how and what that landscape resists, allows, repels, contains, blunt trauma to fucking each worn in flesh. Whereas oppression may be a question of velocity, erasure is necessarily one of form. Skin resists being broken. Burns discolor the necks, unwilling yet obedient. Within geometric study, two bodies are felt identical according to the degree by which each shifts without being punctured or erased. This has no meaning to a moment deformed by thirst, though meaning continues to carry. Wire knots regardless of density or scale. Root silence curls under. Without geometric study, disparate wounds are overlooked. Having survived probable hypothermia, exposure, blunt force as a consequence of, due to consequences of feeling upon knuckles happening under, where exposure is an alternative, a thick nose skeletonized, which looks different according to everyone. To be with whom one cannot leave their body, to study their hands and receive the untoward gift extended only by them we who endured disobedience, who made it by slow practice of disavowal. Every object, every moment has its after image. James Baldwin shows up to this tri-state shooting range. Jordan and Enzaldua hike Brown Canyon, They spot a rare, beardless triannulate hugging parched northern boundaries of her species range. Along the west border of Buenos Aires National Wildlife Refuge in southern Arizona, where masked bobwhite quail are few but on the rise, a woman, Im Ramirez, was found 5 weeks after dying in the wash that intersects 286 at mile 10. Though monsoons did not arrive, trees on both sides were bee overtaken, an unaccountable green. Beyond rational weight, words assume a physics of hunger, and ash according to each shadowy interior. The Mexican jaguar treads backward to observe what flickers against Precambrian walls. The Department of Interior studies effects of stress and fire on vegetation via high-rise, high-res satellite photometrics. No two droughts are alike. In this way, even arms in a praise dance cannot. To take on, and in doing so both manifest and relent, them we who survived a future conditioned to reform rebar between breakfast and their thighs. Largeness. Them who sink bellies open into brown water, Sade crying everyone's tears into wounds having sealed each gill. Arms grew most dense in the early between them. Radiation divergence brings the corners into view. Hot, bright mega-annum of fields, straw sleep sacks, we filled with their hands. An appendix washed up near the barn, pages, current smoothed, leaning funny. We stands to watch, the skin stretched and sewn. We wanted to tell us something, but what and how is being said, wrung out and hanging. Alt Nature, and this is the poem that I am writing in response to my relationship with my partner. Alt Nature. Skin blades open the river, undressing stones. Your word for goose skips miniature shadows against the current. This love story, a horse still drunk from war, named for the incredible absence of her jaw. We look up through jasper eyes from the mud. Dearth is no name for a horse, though her tendon pale underside, diseased trope harboring a gentle eye. Banks thicken at low tide, the river decreasing year within year. Out slowly, I expose your thigh and want to fill you. I'm really getting used to this reading on an iPad, saving paper. At Nevada, the river hooks south, Hoover, Davis, Parker, Laguna. I dip my hand in the bath over your hair, bending. I ask you not to shave. Our geography emerges another form of story. Only deserts know the slow and complete life of water. We negotiate the record, wash the body returned. Oh my God, this is really getting serious. In your desert, I load my anxiety into 9mm magazines. Our favorite mountain, boundary cone, where alone I watch a baby donkey die. A foal is a donkey of less than 1 year, after which time females become fillies. Upon castration, a male is gelding. A female adult is a mare. Driving alone, I watch a foal die. One animal blocks the road, another bends her neck over a body heaving and dull. I pull the trigger and even the accurate rounds push peanut-colored clouds from the berm. Even the future of thorned perennials bend. I want to wake up every morning into love, where love is the question of how I'm going to help you get free, where that means whatever it needs to mean. Tell me again your names for what we become. Sure, an incredible patience of your sacrum, incredible churning of the Colorado at night. This epic has no hero, only flesh and evening which defies imagination. Wealth of textures fade to sky and low basin flora, salt, verde, the efficient grace of a Mojave green. Coyotes stay their lone nocturnes mourning from every hole. Davis Dam holds the river into Lake Mojave. A transitive occurrence relocates power up to 2 terawatt hours per year. chronology and where it leads us, disoriented beneath velvet canopies of. Dearth makes empty the valley, unyielding, irrational beast she might gift to you, stumbling animal graft with scars. Her redding eye, wandering night without horizon, whipped exterior wetting the mesas with her sides. The shapes we make as we undo. Your mouth opens for my light-filtered hand, a question best handled as expressions of time. Razorback suckers can live for decades. Larvae drift to floodplains where 1 in 5 breathes into December. Subjection designates legal flesh. Grammars of threat, to be threatened, endangered, endangered by, to be in danger of. Warm anatomy shouldering each state, thick-muscled to tend uninhabitable fields. In your desert, I break concrete for the clay-heavy soil beneath. My father's daughter, I enter the earth each evening in quiet, dream into seeds and dried blood, thermal medicine. Tony Braxton, Sade, SWV, transfers my body to each seedling, then the night. The river devoted, you between me, rich-veined dermis, the lines of you I take with a muscle throbbing, what it births and makes light. Determine a form, I inside of we, the we flushing us and us dips hot down my throat. We are the form from which histories ripple outward. A shadow branches the hollow of your ear. Wanting sleep, I've entered the field of your body. When I've wanted to eat, I've opened your mouth in birthlight. Sun breaks on the river, a scarlet eye. Sandhill cranes. When dearth, longing, approaches, the wings part into flight. I enter just shy of my locks. The dog, excited, takes in too much water. Views of my wide feet obstructed only through wakes. Juvenile coyotes watch from the dunes. For them in Arizona, it is always open season. Invisibility is a refusal of trace, to leave anything. BOGO wings for Boneless Thursday. BOGO for Kydex holsters on bravoconcealment.com. The degree of difference is the relative distance from being whole. I walk the dog, committing to memory the darkened color and shape of each car to pass. Time moves differently according to what one registers as death, how it must have been for the first beings to see stars, one followed by the next, tearing light from what they followed. Centuries in basalt strewn, dark teeth, their meaning increasing access to the probability of existence, which in the end is only aesthetic. Each map is a being, a scab to burn closed our eyes. Love, if you are where I am, how can they say the natives are gone? I slip of your hand, radio light, thrall and lunate. Genesis, that the world is made through understanding. That the world is made through understanding. There's no reliable record of how many Indigenous women go missing. There's no visible where in the United States where Indigenous women go missing. No glittering ore, open pit, no complete record of how many missing Indigenous women in the United States are murdered. There is no record of how many women are then found in water. Found in transformations of earth to bronze from bell, metal hollows, environment recast, reduced to drainage, the sun-peeled skin which branches hold into their mourning, an already emergence of discord. The horse stamps out from waxy brush, creosote scenting small cuts in her thighs, gender thick race muck, marked, formed black effigy, which is not oppositional, which is without harmony. Love, how could you appear but in glory? My Elysian cheek called to your hips by coppered sound, salt fragrant, song and alloy hardening. I placed a shotgun on layaway. This service I haven't used since I was 12, since I didn't know yet to be ashamed of needing more time or not knowing how to use it. And when I wake up, the air conditioning still isn't working, and Mingus on vinyl, and I demonstrating how to best scramble soft eggs. In your desert, I leave water, socks we hang from the cold branches of a tree. There are notes of what was damaged by animals, destroyed by monsters, what was likely consumed by humans. In the summer, bees hive the crates. A friend hopes aloud that they are not Africanized, possibly a breed, possibly a process. Consider a flesh stone, a room opened to an axis of violence and drought, coarse-grained mesquite split, the wounds overtaken, most beautiful in the morning. In a minute, in a frame of the time it takes. In your desert, I retreat to my garden while you sleep, wave my ass to a Deborah Cox I haven't heard in a minute, movement that turns eventually to a slow and tragically counted electric slide. Keeper of summer, Antares, Corvus, Leo, and Scorpio, the constellations reveal themselves through an absence of stars. The first rule of the garden is that we only play music my mother would turn up to. The second, we ask permission. Time is the point at which you accept a way to continue. In the dark, I practice yoga and dry firing, to unlearn the dichotomy of violence and self-defense, to unlearn the immediacy and agreement of location and breath with which self-defense must be administered, to recalibrate pressure and perceptibility as they are necessary to calculating uses of force, to know what force accumulated behind a forearm bears muscle memory of torture, fantasy, and pulp. Through dance and guided meditation, I learn which points in my body allow me to retch. I breathe long into a hinge of cartilage, then the feeling dissipates before reaching my throat. I let my hands pedal outward. One pedal, a frame, and then the next barren, entering a landscape blanketed with dust. The question of weight, speaking coarsely, coherence shaping our faces, making love continuing to happen, the question of where to linger, when to open my eyes. I haven't done enough, and what I've offered has been with fear and knowing that at some point it won't matter. I have a brother, I say when a woman asks why I come. This we live together, the men who burrow for months and appear as wounds in our feet, your Jesus feet, my biscuit soles rough from the river shore. East on the I-10 from Phoenix toward Eloy, the interstate dips southward, so ahead Pikachu Peak appears to migrate. I arrive and am demanded my name. A desert iguana slips from camouflage, sun along her pearled back. The door unlatches and then there's another. Years ago, he wrote that he was cold, particularly at night. Everything was expensive. A watermelon seed sprouted outside of the shower, and for days everyone watched, until an officer noticed. He needed money for a sweater. He was growing thin. It was hard to sleep. You've said that in Mojave Afterlife, there are everywhere watermelons. When you pick one, another one grows. I still say that sounds like nigga heaven. I just want love. I just want to feel loved, he says, flush with desire. The bartender, the social worker, his supervisor, his girlfriend tell him it's time to go. Then he won't stop cursing, so I hang up the phone. He flew into the air when the truck hit him. I told myself, tuck and roll, nigga, tuck and roll. So he walks away with no injuries. Then that night, fear of staggering down the highway braided itself to my orgasm. I meet a sculptor from Pittsburgh at the dog run. Hers is humping. She remarks that everything in your desert is dead or being hunted. We have a mutual friend, which makes things awkward. I wait, then offer that the inability to recognize life outside of the scale and terms with which one is accustomed is a serious problem in this country. She waits. Yes. To know this and still decline the call. One medicine helped before it sent him to mania, which is the problem with misdiagnoses, which is the problem with incompetence and general disregard. My refusal to regard is a measure of defense that thus requires constant attention. I imagine a light that visits free-living animals as they sleep. The family of quail who slip under our bushes in through the back, the brood picked off one by one or by two. The shelter provided to those who demonstrate signs of severe mental illness shares a name with that which is provided to those who can demonstrate relevant and imminent threat, depending on the country. Welcome to this country, he says, my brother. My face each morning, the question of receding landscape, entering a country under the blinding trauma of emergence. As Saul blocked the road, I look up expecting a new name. On May 2nd, 2019, Arizona passed House Bill 2570 to establish a committee to address the epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women throughout the state. Indigenous women watched over the Senate floor. After years of advocacy, Debbie Nez Manuel stood alongside her daughters holding a photo of her mom gone missing in 1973. An epidemic produces a time, if not clarity. Quaking aspen, abundant in Northeast Arizona, reproduce primarily shooting up from their roots. Growing in clones across time zones, broad ranges in elevation, the crowns grow quickly, upwards of 2 feet per year in loam soil. Their glory in fall, gold brushing cream, toothed leaves among first to appear in the wake of fire. An act on missing and murdered Indigenous women. Text of bill begins on next page. Unlike most of Arizona, Navajo Nation does observe daylight savings. In 1973, the sun fell over and back the roof of St. Anne's Mission, illuminating the rectory and each of its hogans welcoming light from the east. Francis was found and buried that same year. Aspen root systems extend centuries without interruption, constellations beneath ground, damp and streak ripping the earth. I walk my lineage, an animal looking at my heels, head lowered, long-muscled and hoofed. Expulsion of an organism, variations in color, sensations of flight, a slow gathering disregard for food. Ability to enact time as a verb rests on particular understandings of the noun, the flesh and rock of it, the delicious hum of 3 a.m., wide-eyed days left unshowered. I braid my darkness into a shadowy mane, but darkness, rough and unforgiving, multiplies to its own beast. Pores open, your smell in my eye, I rest my ear in a territory streaked volcanic time. How am I doing on time, James? Speaking of time.
I think you have a little more time left.
A little more, okay. Just before noon on members-only days in Tri-State Shooting Park, I have the range alone. The regulars at home because their wives are making lunch. This is the time for Sade radio. This is when we whistle by your side while I load a line of clips. In your river, I watch morning shift across your skin. The dog forever taking in too much water, I search for the language to hold you. As with desert rain, down several paths to the water, a trail of light remembers your back. The oldest public record of Black Death in the state of Arizona remembers an unidentified man lost to exposure. His skin may have remained, then found in dry orchards out of season among cotton, saguaro picked by birds. Exposure is a revelation of an identity or fact, state of being exposed to contact with something else, even when making very little noise. The brutality of thick air and money, fever and disgust for what is fleshy yet unuseful. Of the raw materials necessary to maintain life, which may be commodified, water distinguishes itself through ease of portability. Unlike bones left by a cairn to be seen, along the edge of Pinal County, years of migrants discard what they no longer need and what might identify them as such. Shoes the texture of sea anemones, black bottles to hold water without reflecting light. To look at the sky is to observe without recognizing our particular maiming. Wounds of rapture ache the arrival of light, the emergence of color. Havasu. My sister's first evening in your desert, we live stream abolitionist drag queens for hours of figs and cruet. I read an Asado poem for the audience, her words in my mouth, disruption, threading pleasure in the universe. It belongs so to the dark. She and I descend my garden, our hula hoops in hand. There are nights, the sky, my consummate unfolding animal. Avatar, horseshit, glitter, cake, burning of a body to R&B mashups after dark. Landlessness is a compulsion to work. The degree of collective inhumanity is consistently relational to the strength and degree of vulnerability to compulsory tactics and national investment in the ongoingness of compulsion. When my father remembers childhood, his flesh illuminates the land. Of his 17 siblings, always someone had worms. Peanut red stains consumed their hands, sweet feeding, a praxis by which one captures and cares for a wild hog. Hogs are pigs larger than a specified weight. A boar is wild and of any gender or domesticated animal with his sexual organs intact. Particularly gathered, some feelings convene in sediment only. The most viable soil. On the internet, a map of land transformed. Having been struck by lightning near Las Ciénegas, a man then identified was found fully flushed. Condition code 1. The last sound he heard moving through the desert, thunder swaying Scappettone grasses. His probable electrocution mapped into a database of migrant deaths where his coordinates are crossed infrequently by Sonoran jaguars fond of streams. At 51 feet below surface, the groundwater is shallow. The Belfiero is identified by a two-part structure. His rising question, then definitive response. Precious water wetting his tender green breast. Riparian species mark joining of water and land, where cottonwoods extending their gold-filtered crowns optimize light, stratify sediments, and keep stream-dwelling species cool. So is that the lowland leopard frog will not blister. So is that the large cat's paw print remains fresh in the soil. Paths to water remember sound as leaving a body. I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Saretta. That was great. I'd like us to take a 5-minute intermission now, during which time we'll ask you to donate $5 to the readers. And before I go, I just want to remind everybody that tomorrow night, another Artist Space event, this time sponsored and produced by Lonely Christopher's Interpoets Theater production company. The play will be The Rapture, written by Mark Wallace and myself at 7:30 tomorrow night. So I hope to see many of you there. Meanwhile, let's take a 5-minute break and we'll come back with Jennifer Scappettone. Welcome back, and thank you for your donations. As always, all contributions to the Segue Reading Series go directly to pay the poets. So please, if you haven't donated already, you can do so at the end of the program, or if you remember how to do it, your donations are always welcome. Whatever we receive at the end of the evening will get divided equally among the poets, along with the standard fee for the reading. And now on to the next reader. Jennifer Scappettone's work covers so much territory that I hardly know where to begin. Her environmental writing on copper and landfills builds a link between poetry and garbage as the transitional space of her writing seeks, quote, to mobilize the disgust provoked by encounter with what has been cast off. Jennifer notes that our cities are built on Superfund sites. Our poetry, recollected in tranquility, revives this detritus for our lives and loves. Her piece, Agitation of a Copper Lyre, strums the entire twisted pair network of voice and data communications and notes how, quote, it may seem ludicrous to write poetry as a means of drilling into such a problem. Yet she appears to use poetry as an indispensable read into the workings of capital gouging the earth. She decided to make poetry figure it out. And as with Saretta, she drives an alternative view of the relationship between humanity and nature And this, to me, is the core of environmental poetry and ecopoetics. Jennifer's poems undermine the notion of essences through ecological networks, focusing on connections not only the noun refuse or refuse, but also the politics of refusal. Even aesthetics, as her work on Venice and Killing the Moonlight attests, must be questioned in the way politics intervenes in beauty. Her translations cross-examine modernist forms and formats. Quote, I also think it's become too easy to crown oneself experimental or transgressive through formal tinkering with a source text. While she modernizes poetry, she doesn't fall for its easier seductions. Her resistance expands the ranges of her texts from words to words and surroundings that weave the Persian carpet Zhukovsky imagines of purely lexical structure. Now here's one of them, if I can make the machine work. I was able to do it before. And here you can see how she weaves the visual and the lexical together. Oops, now I have to figure out how to get back to my image. There we go. These components of Jennifer's work come together for me, as she says, thinking in dilated time signatures. My reading of Jennifer's poetry telescopes to her critique of that intimate chronology of lyric poetry, at the same time that she seeks a lyric of epics, scaling up and down the registers of the planet. Environmental conflicts, poetical contradictions are revealed and projected. Among these vectors thrust forward in her many volumes, today Jennifer will include the audience in her reading. I'll let her tell you what she would like you to do, but I wanted to remind you to activate your screens and turn off your microphones so we can all see each other and still listen to the poet. Here then is the amazing Jennifer Scappettone.
Thank you so much, James. And thank you, Saretta, for that reading. It was beautiful and reminded me of all the walks through Arizona that were part of the research for the project that I'm going to present from. It turns out that the mines that I'm going to talk about, they sort of score the borders of the USA, from El Paso to Douglas to Bisbee, even to the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So, and it was a gorgeous reading. I would like to, at the very end, open to your voices. And so in anticipation of that, if you wouldn't mind changing the audio settings in your preferences on Zoom, so that under Zoom US menu under audio, there's the capacity to suppress background noise as auto, low, medium, or high. And if you could put that on low, it would help you hear the very beginning of what I'm going to present. And it will also help us at the very end. And at the very end, I just wanted to do an experiment. The reading is organized around the fact that one, Zoom is subtended by a telecommunications network that relies upon extraction of copper, among other materials. The reading is also organized around the fact that Zoom makes it possible for us to convene from all over the place. and therefore that we may all speak many languages, although the language that we normally use in poetry readings in the United States and in the poetry readings hosted by Zoom is English. So you'll notice that there are lots of languages presented in the work that I'm going to present today. And I wanted to do something at the very end that focuses on translation. Before I really start, I just want to say thanks to James and Izzy and Artist Space. This is also the third time that I'm reading at Segue, and the first time was like almost 20 years ago now. So I guess that's how old I am. It's sort of insane to think about that. So with that, I also am just going to say that I'm not at home. I'm presenting from a converted garage in Florida where I am so that I can see my parents for urgent reasons. And as a result, there are going to be glitches. And given that I'm talking about the material substrate of the network, I think it's okay. And just like, don't freak out if my video is glitchy or my audio is glitchy. I will ask Artist Space to tell me if I like totally disappear. That wouldn't be ideal. But otherwise, I'm just gonna like roll with the punches of the fact that I'm gonna be pixelated and glitchy at times. Although this is anything but glitch art. Okay, so with that, I'm also gonna be sharing my screen on and off. Smoke penny lyric chord heaven bred, a few acts. Mine canary.
Tuhinga o mua, ki te whakamahi, ki te mahi kore.
Una jaula llena de oxígeno para agarrar un monumento cayendo.
一个装满氧气的牢笼，抓住正在掉落的纪念碑。
Une cage pleine d'oxygène pour attraper un monument en train de tomber.
برای نگه داشتن بنای یادبودی که فرو می‌ریزد.
Una gabbia colma di ossigeno per acciuffare un monumento cadente.
充满氧气的笼子，接住坠落的纪念碑。
Enter the bi-voiced syrinx, a cage full of oxygen to catch a falling monument. monument, Serenus Canaria in Carboni Fodina, a ventilator for the climate canary, from the father of oxygen therapy. If you can't be free, be a mystery. My first poetry teacher, Rita Dove, on Billie Holiday in the poem called Canary. A mystery play with Canary as sacrificial hero. The language knowledge's silent and standard Zoom space as overture, reweaving the whole Teatrum Mundi cage. The same society that believes we can save the earth by plundering at greater depths than before, believes it can create a bot which will translate all languages, all phenomena into exploitable data. The serenette, a musical instrument devised in Enlightenment France that mimics the voices of canaries through a crank for bellowed pipes, is a precursor to artificial intelligence. Insofar as its mimic work was used to train canaries trapped in cages who were therefore songless, to sing militarized ditties of their own demise, such as La Petite Chasse, the little hunt or small game hunt, which you just heard as our opening theme. Notwithstanding these pretensions, these ariad up exercises in violence, we do not comprehend the canary's intelligence, nor can we match the heights of bi-directional song produced by its majestic twofold voice box, the syrinx. The canary, a so-called sentinel species, martyr of the Anthropocene, a pet happily sacrificed as collateral damage in the extractive enterprise of underbowels, fueling the growth by death of capital. The oxygen cage masquerades as benevolence for maximizing profit, minimizing loss of both human and avian laborers, eluding the need to purchase more choke diggers and choke birds. Canary as us, we suffocate ourselves and devise cages of resuscitation, ragged bandages in flight of PPE, boring cloud excavations, cloud colonies to be cooled with Arctic ice, bellowing ourselves away from and towards livability. An ouverture for Aeolian harping. Even as a cross point in a network vibrating with information, she has learned next to nothing. The book in progress from which this fragment hails began when I discovered that the copper rod mill across the street from my childhood home on Long Island, whose unregulated dumping practices were in great part responsible for the community's cancer cluster, had extracted and smelted its copper in the Andes. Through decades of labor and environmental manipulation for indigenous, Chilean, and Peruvian communities that led the area of origin to be listed among the world's most polluted sites. Digging into corporate reports, I also learned that the mill had provided the electrical wire for the World Trade Center, among others. The text tries and sometimes fails to track the circuitry of copper extraction undergirding contemporary telecommunications and the so-called cloud. This libretto for virtually sung dialogue between the characters I and O was composed by writing through the lyrics of a song written by Johnny Burke, plundering the language of telegraph code books sold to mining corporations and copper entrepreneurs in the heyday of telegraphy for the purpose of economizing and encrypting sensitive messages. Lyricord is the code word for by constant penetration, for instance, intrusive for native, clarifying how telegraphic technology was used to control the laboring populations who made it possible. These codes required extensive and filigreed labors of translation at the sending and receiving ends. We find an uptick in their use in correspondence between managers and investors during periods of labor strife, particularly in the 19-teens. During the Great Strike of 1913 at the Calumet and Hecla Mining Company on Michigan's Keweenaw Peninsula, for example, whose consequences were memorialized by Woody Guthrie's song, 1913 Massacre. Another example would be the Bisbee Wobblies strike that led to the miners being exiled to New Mexico. The code words contained within these alternative lexicons translated frequently used phrases into defamiliarizing condensed natural languages, and they harbor a material unconscious of non-alternative facts that we can access nowhere else. Investment encodes the apparently common phrase that we have a good deal of difficulty with the natives, for instance. The code word for copper wire is shuddering. A key to the reader for the next section, code words from Mooring and Neal's 1901 New General and Mining Telegraph Code appear in all caps. Their decodings appear as italics. And this libretto was written after the strike that proceeded from the introduction of an economizing tool into the mines, the one-man pneumatic air drill, which the miners realized would put half of them out of work since the prior drill had been a two-man air drill, as well as leading to silicosis of their lungs and other serious and really deathly maladies. One-man drill. Every time it rains, beastly bath bricks, blasting bonanzas have been struck. Don't you know each cloud contains denonymous bellitude, escape, don't consider business safe. Every time it rains, draconic air drills, a well-known and most respectable firm will not pay in advance. Don't you know each stope contains gripe penny brokerage, liberty to act as banks think proper, one man, widow makers, air drill, soliloquies, gangs of shuddering, copper wire undesirables, smoke, penny, lyricord, dead's heave, last year by constant penetration encroaching on the reserve. Every time it rains, jaw rope, lynch law, news quite correct, pending the hearing of the case. Don't you know each gouge contains boom and bust of nitro lungs? Don't you know each crowd contains asphyxial, umbrageous, evensong, memorandum of association shall require a hoisting engine of 5,300 horsepower. Pennyweight, hellhound, hope soon to be making lyricisms, hue-hole, melody, market in a downward tendency now presents a better appearance. You'll find your fortune fallen all over town. Subjugationers disobeyeth, strikers have not yet fallen. Be sure that your unshowered is uprising downpour. Be sure that your 6% profit is 800% fire damp in the mine. Save them for a pack horse of sunstroke and flowerage. Save them for a sale of 23,250 oars will be assured, and inform us by telegraph at once. If you want the things you love match, unless you can get patents, bathing by blasting, you must have showers. Outspoken, rise, backfaller, the battery returns, noise in the wires. So when you hear it and thunder, showing traces of gold, bath metal, much blasting is needed. Disorderly stocks continue falling. Don't run under a tree. There'll be a one-man drill, our agitator, dropping a dit and a din in the odious machine for you and me. Pennies from Nether, a chorus. These page spreads represent the analog transcription of a virtual chorus, materialized first and foremost within the space of an app gathering the voices of friends in all their languages. It was tactically humbling to translate this poem from audible vibration and light passing through filters, liquid crystals, and electrodes onto reticent paper. These are digitized paper outtakes broadcast over faulty broadband of a three-dimensional durational work developed in collaboration with artists Judd Morrissey and Abraham Avnizan, Lament, or The Mine Has Been Opened Up Well, whose libretto encompasses choral readings of encrypted Copper Company telegrams and transmutations of pop song lyrics written in 1936 for microphone crooner Bing Crosby. A long time ago, 1,000,000 years BC, the best things in life were absolutely free. But no one appreciated a sky that was always blue. This work aims to occupy the technologies that make Zoom and YouTube convenings possible in counter-futurist fashion, pouring backwards and forwards to expose their veins in and into so-called real-world environments. Focusing on copper's status as the conductive foundation of modern transnational telecommunications networks, the pieces sound the environmental and social implications of this chemical element's extraction, processing, and salvage. They sound in both senses of the word. They plumb the depths of these processes in submarine cable routes and the mining operations at their foundation. They translate those depths into audible shudderings of air. These soundings attend our manufactured hallucination of ghosted technologies and currency through virtual and augmented reality to express the material fallout of such apparently ethereal phenomena as the cloud sensuously. Don't you know each cloud contains pennies from Nether, designating what lies beneath the earth, native to hell or the underworld? I'll share one act conceived collaboratively and coded through the brilliance of writer, performing artists, and code artists Judd Morrissey and Abraham Avnizan, titled Pennies from Nether. Armed with this app, users navigating their way among voices made to materialize as pence before the camera eyes of their tablets and phones might be moved to imagine the migrations not only of copper, but of the aluminum and silicon inside these devices, their compounds of lithium oxide, indium oxide, plastic, and glass, as well as the possible conflict minerals within. And imagine, by extension, the variegated all-over plosions of bust and boom. In Scottish dialect, a nether refers to oppression, stress, a withering or stunting influence. In mining lingo, it designates a trouble, a fault or dislocation in a seam of capitalizable material. Proposed here translates into profited. Wire becomes whiteness. Chain cable encrypts the order to cover all emergencies. In one code book, nether was the word for nature. In the piece I'm going to share, those wielding an iPad can navigate their way through a shower of pennies, each coin conveying the voice of another comrade in translation who agreed to translate some lines from this libretto. Every time it rains profited whitenessing, proposed wiring. Don't you know each cloud contains choke damp chain cable? Curtail the output, cover all emergencies with the pretty penny. Lend it, spend it, send it rolling along. That's what storms were made for, but you shouldn't be afraid, for what do you know about me underneath? The language is necessary to carry on the transnational business of copper mining and smelting are and have been numerous, and so were my solicitations. Some translators sang into their phones, some recorded recitations from subway platforms, one sent in a file via email from noisy Mysuru. The idea was to rekindle the dream of global solidarity expressed in the lyrics of the industrial workers of the world's Little Red Songbook, still in print from a small publishing house in my Chicago neighborhood, Rogers Park, even if such a song of solidarity could never manifest in instantaneous flesh. A precise sense of collective suffering and determination was cultivated not only through the Wobblies' direct actions, but through language work after all, through their many acts of translation.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. That was great.
I'm not done.
You're not done? Oh.
No.
हर बारिश में बरसती है सूट मिजाजी मकसूद तारे बरक़ी तुम नहीं
Каждый раз, когда
Kiedy pada deszcz, leje ze świadczeń.
Planificat. Conexiune.
Mỗi khi trời mưa
Chaque fois qu'il pleut, il pleut.
Every time it rains, it
Every time it rains, profited whitenessing.
Every time it rains, profited whiteness.
जंजीर लंगर जो निकलता है उसको महजूफ कर दे मुसीबत में काम आ हर बारिश में बरसती है सूदमंद पेजाई
Témoignage à profit. Câblage proposé. Vous le savez bien.
أتدرون أن عند كل سحابة عابرة
Mưa lại nhuận làm trắng đề xuất dây đồng. Cậu không biết là
Proposed wiring. Don't you know which cloud contains choke damp chain cable?
Don't you know each cloud contains choke?
Cover all emergencies. Every time it rains, profited whitenessing. Proposed wiring.
chaque fois qu'il
pleut
كل مرة تمطر تبييض ربحي مقترح تسليك ألا تعلم أن كل سحابة تحوي ألياف غازات خانسة
Joka kerta kun sataa, hyötyneet valkaistumassa, ehdotettu langoitus.
تغلق المنافذ
Etkä
تحسبا
tiedä, että
لكل
jokainen
طارئ.
pilvi sisältää
لكم حينها أن تفعلوا ما شئتم بالفلفل العبور يقربون يصرفون
Every time it rains, The output. Prophetic whiteness. Proposed wiring. Don't you know which cloud down chain cable? Choke down chain
Tego notiad, das var Spartan, som temne tar.
Thank you. If we have time left, I would conduct an experiment. Do we, James?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I'm going to try to type. Oh, I can't. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen again and show you what the directions are. So this is a channeling of a Jackson Maclow simultaneity that basically takes his score and makes it into a translation score. And I thought that it would be fun to do over Zoom. If people want to selectively unmute themselves to say something into the Zoom space. And the directions look very, in the typical Maclow fashion, the directions look totally confusing, but they're actually pretty simple. Basically, anyone can begin by making any vocal utterance or by emitting any sound from their device or from an object in the room. And I invite other people to begin to translate this utterance or sound. Translations can consist of written or spoken English phrases, other natural or ideal languages, including drawing and music, gesture, ASL. Translations on paper should be held up periodically to the screen. This new paragraph is almost exactly Maclow's words. Utterances may be in any language or none. They may be sentences, clauses, phrases, phrase fragments, polysyllabic word fragments, syllables, phonemes, etc. Any other sounds produced in the mouth, throat, chest, or device. And any utterance may be repeated any number of times or not at all. After a person makes an utterance and repeats it or not, she can repeat it or not, they can become silent again, but another person should step in to continue the action by making a vocal utterance, and other people should begin to translate this utterance or sound. So at a certain point, it may become unclear which utterance is the source text to be translated. That is fine as long as everyone continues making utterances or translating utterances out loud or on paper in the air throughout the exercise. And I'm just going to look at the clock, and I'm going to stop this in 4 minutes. Okay, is that okay, James?
Sure, that sounds perfect.
Okay, so, and this again is Maclow's line, all utterances are free in all respects. So, we've started.
It's
Big Tooth, Auto Tune, Chromatic Aspen, Sharp, Chromatic, Flat, Natural, Chromatic.
Sharp.
Piano, piano, piano ma acuto.
Exploitable data. Exploitable data.
Jenna Soprano.
Data inappropriata.
People machine of simuletas. Counting, ordering,
Una
whistling.
persona, macchina, contando, fischiando. Abigail, who lived in Rome, mi capisce.
An ARPANET map. An environmental flag.
Una bandiera ambientale. Piana.
The future is nasty. The future is nasty.
Il futuro è un futuraccio.
Stop history. Can't stop history. Stop. Good.
Se qualcuno vuole tradurre in una lingua che non esiste, ti dico arigato.
Gilgamesh matters. Gilgamesh, 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 Gilgamesh.
Mojitaba. Exploiting data. The past is nasty. The future.
Curious story about humanity and about our lifestyle. Gilgamesh.
Come si traduce una ristata?
Gilgamesh.
Not as her ukulele.
Gilgamesh.
People are shy. They're shy. They're very shy.
I'm trying to share, but I don't know how to share.
People are
Hell
shy.
has
They
no
don't know
fury
how to
like a woman's fury. Hell has no fury like a woman.
Non ha una furia furiosa come quella di una donna. One more minute to shy sharing.
No.
In between.
Why do I have to keep watching the nut job? Why can't I listen to other people?
Keweenaw, 1913.
Right.
Little monkey, little monkey, little monkey.
So shy.
Sure.
Shy.
Let's just look at books, okay? They're books. Look at books.
Schüchtern.
Sushi.
They're books. I have books. This is like the classic of
Professorial demonstration with ginger cats.
Judd has the code book in the screen and my cat behind the code book. My collaborator and friend is cat sitting for me and also translating from the code book. Grazie, grazie, grazie a tutti. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me. It was great to see and hear you all and be a little silly with you.